Accident of Choice by Literally Mad Lad on AO3. Episode 5, Chapter 3, WWE Wrestling Match with a Merman. Despite not being invited, Deku tried to enter Katsuki's territory no less than 2 other times before taking a spell to ruminate on the failed attempts. Katsuki was always victorious. Of course he was. He was amazing after all. A mere human could not compare to his bronze, his strength, and his fighting skills. If he used his teeth, it would be all over. But he never used his teeth on Deku. He nearly did on the last try, when Deku attempted to fight him for dominance. Deku had jumped in, wielding nothing but his wetsuit, gloves, and a pair of hard, solid shoes, and tried to wrestle Katsuki's arms behind his back. He wound up getting a cut on his hand from Katsuki's fin, and after being tossed like a barrel back onto the deck, the accomplice had left it in a fit of rage. She had been screaming like a maniac the whole time, as if Katsuki would commit murder right in front of her. If he ever committed a murder, it would be to shut her up. I hope I didn't ruin your trust with that attempt. Deku sighed shortly thereafter. Katsuki was still clicking. He was furious. Deku had taught him his favorite pair of words. Fuck you. And he remembered if Deku could hear it in the clicks. He was really trying to articulate it. After drying his hands off and tying the wound, Deku fetched his notebook, sniffing and muttering to himself where he wrote, "Can't win a fight, which means I can't fight for dominance over the territory." Deku glanced at Katsuki, as if Katsuki would change his mind. He went back to writing. Kachan is really mad at me now. A week went by with little progress on any front. Katsuki retreated into the cave system and didn't come out for feedings or the scheduled speech lessons he had with Deku, or even physical therapy with the accomplice. Katsuki waited until they left to hunt down the food, some of which had died shortly after shock of being released into the water. Katsuki always tossed those morsels back onto the deck. Deku could take care of them for all he cared. Katsuki did, in a sense, feel betrayed. Why should he humor them if they didn't want to respect his boundaries? The more time he spent recalling, the more he wondered if one day they'd stop visiting him. When would his last meal be? He never humored Deku's desire to create a self-sustainable ecosystem before, but now he regretted it. If I stop humoring them, will they disappear? His entire adolescence had been spent in a tube where meals were expected and routinely delivered. They were neither tasty nor interesting, but it was sustainable nonetheless. He didn't want to go back to that, but he was still tethered to Deku and the accomplice until they decided he wasn't worth their time. And he wasn't giving them any of his time these days. He stopped eating. Deku had said once that if he didn't eat all the fish he delivered, they might reproduce and lay eggs, and soon there would be dozens of fish constantly coexisting with him. Katsuki didn't even want to share his territory with a bunch of mindless fish, but the less he ate of them, the more abundant they became. He started to see them treading closer to his remote corner of the cavern, where he often slept. It was secluded, though, and he was certain he had never let a fish survive long enough to see it. It became apparent after several days that something was different, because Deku and the accomplice started to see fish live, fish taking laps out of the sunlight. If Katsuki wasn't eating, then it was easiest to assume two things: that Katsuki was no longer around, or that Katsuki was ill. Since it was a closed cave system, there was certainly Katsuki had an escape, which suggested the latter. I need to find him, Izuku insisted. You are not getting back in that water, Momo said, but Izuku was already running off to fetch his diving gear. By sundown, Izuku was suited up and dropping into the water. It was the first time he had submerged without Katsuki spectating, and when Kachan didn't immediately emerge, Izuku's heart dropped to the pit of his stomach. He flicked the headlamp and proceeded on. The tunnels and pockets were all dark, and the amber glow from the lamps in the main cave faded out quickly. The headlamp reflected, scattered across the walls, and across the domes of air he stopped in through. A part of him wondered what Katsuki would do to him if he found Izuku so entered into his territory. Maybe I'm being hunted right now, and I don't even know it, he thought. He had only witnessed glimpses of Katsuki hunting, and knew he was an incredibly adept hunter. He wouldn't be surprised if Kacchan found him before he found Kacchan. He pushed on, glancing forward and back with every turn he took. He had explored the cave thoroughly with Momo before even bringing Katsuki into the picture. But before it had predominantly left and uninhabited, it had taken over a month for them to explore and prepare the cave for Kacchan. And now there was an uncertified sea creature lurking in the depths, and the mere thought of Kacchan's fangs right there and then, in the abyss, left Izuku momentarily petrified. There was a part of the cave that always unnerved him, and as he approached it, Katsuki's heart rose from his stomach and into his throat. The black expansive clear into the shape of a crevice that plunged down into the earth. Initially, out of sight, Izuku peered over the edge and cast his headlamp down into it. The sea bass the size of his forearm shot past. Relax, he told himself. I know every living creature that is in here, and the only one that could hurt me is Kacchan. The last 3 times he squared up against Kacchan, though, Kacchan had ripped his oxygen mask off. Izuku's breath left him, and the oxygen mask in it shakily, robotically hissed. He had explored everything on this level of the cave, and all that was left was the bottom of the crevice. He suspected Kacchan's place to be resigned, or further down anyways. Kacchan was a tectonable, after all, and the study he had found Kacchan in had gradually admitted Kacchan to lower levels of pressure, for better or for worse. He imagined Kacchan's natural habitat was far deeper than this cave system allowed. Izuku allowed himself to sink into the abyss. As he neared the bottom, the pressure in his head started to gather in his plugged ears. He maneuvered through the gap between 2 fallen rocks, where he recalled another network of tunnels being. They looped around, and they neared the very back. He recalled there being a smooth shelf where limestone had been washed away over time. When he and Momo first discovered it, he imagined it being the perfect spot for Kacchan to settle. It was secluded, difficult to get to, and both of those factors made it safe. He suspected that, after all of Kacchan's years spent in that tube, he might take to smaller settlements at first anyways. There were larger pockets in the other corners of the system, but this one was an excellent choice. The first glimpse Izuku had of Kacchan's tail nearly had him screaming for flight. Kacchan's color had recalled back to its paley gray, and Izuku's nerves were on high alert until that moment. He calmed his breathing, though, and swam a bit closer, just enough to recognize a flip-flop on the shelf. Momo had tossed it over the edge of the pool a month ago, and Kacchan had stolen it. This is a bad idea, Izuku thought before he even got a glimpse of Kacchan's face. If Kacchan had been furious about Izuku invading the entrance, there was no telling how he'd react to. The end of Kacchan's tail flicked. Izuku's hand shot up, defectively. The headlamp. He didn't want to blind Kacchan on the top of it, with the headlamp reeling off the nearby surfaces. Izuku intentionally could only see the glowing red of Kacchan's eyes, where his pupils have gone blonde wide. The red was just a mere ring around the pupils. His eyes looked tired though, narrowed, and as Izuku adjusted, he was relieved to find Kacchan wasn't showing his teeth. Though his ears were plunged, he couldn't hear the tailed warnings signs of Kacchan's preparatory clicks. Kacchan was reclined on his stomach, his arms resting under his chin, surrounded by the recoils of his tail. Izuku recognized well enough how much Momo would be reprimanding Kacchan for how his posture. Though now, seeing Kacchan reverted back to the way Izuku was most familiar with, seeing back at the facility, he couldn't help but feel at fault. Guilty. Are you okay? Izuku sighed. Kacchan blinked slowly before turning his head to the side, away from Izuku. Izuku skidded a bit in the front of his vision to follow up with a, "Are you feeling sick?" Kacchan raised a single hand to tap his index and his middle finger to his thumb. No. Izuku realized that he was hearing something. His own heart thumbing against the pressure in his ears. He swallowed against it, but it just made the jaw pop. He had done this to Kacchan, and he needed to fix it. The problem? He didn't know how. His fear of making the situation worse rendered him paralyzed. How was he supposed to gain Kacchan's trust back? Momo had been right. He shouldn't have gone back in the water again. And there he was, treading in sacred water. What was he supposed to say? "Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt, I'll leave now?" Instead, Izuku signed. "If you come back to the surface, I'll give you tuna." Kacchan didn't even look at him. Out of the corner of his eye, Izuku registered a fish off the distance. Another sea bass. He winced. Kacchan wasn't food motivated anymore. If anything, he wasn't motivated at all. Okay, alright. So, I'm just gonna say, okay. I got my bearings in. 1, Izuku, you're stupid. 2, Izuku, you're stupid. 3, Izuku, have I mentioned that you are stupid? And 4, Izuku, you're stupid. Okay, anyways, as I was saying, before I started saying that Izuku was stupid because, Izuku, you're stupid, is the fact that, 1, okay, Katsuki is currently going through, I guess, technically speaking, Kacchan, Katsuki would, I'm just gonna say Bakugou. Bakugou would have some sort of attachment issue. And not in the sense that people abandon him, but because he was ripped away, right? And he had literally no one to trust, no one to attach to. So he has an attachment issues in the sense of not detachment, but attachment, right? He doesn't have a problem detaching, he has a problem attaching. And right, and most of the time, if you have a problem detaching, you then have a problem attaching. And if you have a problem attaching, you could have a problem detaching. But in his sense, he has a problem attaching. That's probably his biggest problem. But once he attached, the detach would be really hard. Just like how someone may have a problem with detaching, they have problems attaching because they attach to too many people. Or, the detach is what makes them not want to attach. It's different scenarios, different ways that that kind of stuff that could affect you and stuff. And in this sense, we could tell that Katsuki doesn't want to trust someone and then be backstabbed. But then he's trusting Izuku and he feels as though, okay, if, I'm gonna go back to being alone. I'm gonna be back to having no one. I don't know what mermaids, their social patterns are in this universe, right? In most of the universe I've seen, though, they travel in schools, I guess. I don't know what pairs of. They travel in packs, right? They travel in flocks. They travel in pods. There it is. And for the most part, they're not alone. They're social creatures, right? Kind of reminds me of like orcas and the killer sharks and stuff like that. They travel in pairs, and whenever they're captured and they don't have pairs and stuff like that, they get really depressed and stuff and they stop eating and things like that. Obviously, Katsuki is putting some logic behind it and being like, I'm not gonna eat so that the fish can then reproduce, so that then I have food, so that then I don't need Izuku and Momo, right? That need of like, I do not need them. They can leave. I don't need them. But deep down, he doesn't want them to leave, Clearly he doesn't want them to leave. And he's just putting up that front for himself. Normally it's for others and stuff like that, but that front is up for himself. He's not being truthful to himself. But I cannot wait to read the next chapter and see what has in store. Anyways, as always, my raindrops, make sure to eat, sleep, drink water, take your meds. Have a wonderful day or night. Link to my Discord server and socials are down in the description. Subscribe to see more of my content, and thank you so much for watching.